Coming later in this episode, I got mistaken for a real Dogman. But first, CHET, the Dogman. Dear Scary Stories, NYC. I have a small collection of Dogman stories that seem to date to about 100 years ago, which were passed down to my uncle Stan, who agreed to write them down for me in an email for you. He heard the stories from his grandfather, who claimed they happened to him personally. Our family at that time, this was around 1920, were all dirt poor, living in a small collection of houses in a bit of woods in the Midwest outside of some small town. In that place there was an upright walking dogman who had moved from hunting to scavenging, living off the kindness of the local population. Without any further ado, here is my uncle's email, which contains within it a second email from the descendant of a different witness to this particular upright walking canine of the 1920s. Take it away, Uncle Stan. Well, gather round, and I'll tell you young'uns a story about my grandfather Tate and his good friend CHET. CHET was a dogman, you see. He walked upright just like us, but he was much taller and more muscular than any man I've ever met. He had thick, shaggy fur covering most of his body, and a fierce set of teeth that could scare off any living thing that got in his way. Now, my grandfather Tate met CHET when they were both just youngsters. They lived in an area of the woods where 3 family clans made their homes, called the Village at the time by the people from that area. CHET the Dogman haunted the woods around that same small village on the outskirts of town, and CHET often wandered into town to scavenge for food behind restaurants and in garbage cans. Grandfather Tate was a curious boy, and he was fascinated by CHET. Most people found the upright walking bear-sized canine a frightening sight, as you might well imagine. But young Grandpa Tate would leave scraps of food out for CHET to find, encouraging him to hang out near his family's house more. Eventually, the boy and the oversized dog became friends. CHET quickly became an important part of the village, by which I mean just those 3 extended families, who all lived in that woodland there. I presume it was one of them who named CHET in the first place, although the origin of his name has been lost to history. CHET was an incredible hunter on top of his scavenging talents, so once he was accepted by the others, he stopped only taking from them and would sometimes share his kills with them, or even go hunting in conjunction with the humans. Another way that CHET became valuable was that he was always willing to protect the villagers from any danger. He even became something of a bodyguard for my grandfather Tate in his teen years and young adulthood. No one dared mess with Tate if CHET was by his side. One day CHET saved my grandfather Tate's life. Tate was out in the woods when a pack of wolves surrounded him. He was sure he was done for, but then CHET came to his rescue. He fought the wolves off, almost single-handedly, and saved grandfather Tate's life. Those dogs were ferocious, their eyes reflecting the moonlight. Their fangs were bared as they circled grandfather Tate, growling and snapping. Tate had no weapon, no way to defend himself against the wild pack. Suddenly one of the dogs yelped and went flying through the air. The pack turned as one to see what had caused the commotion. What they saw froze them instantly. There, silhouetted against the moon, was a huge, upright dogman. His name was CHET. He stood as tall as a grizzly bear, with muscled arms, and shoulders as broad as a truck. His fur was thick and golden, and his eyes glowed with a fierce intelligence. The dog snarled and lunged, but CHET was too quick for him. He dodged their attacks with ease, using his great strength to knock them back. The dogs soon realized that they had met their match, and they began to slink away into the shadows. But CHET wasn't finished with them yet. He chased after them, barking and growling in a way that nearly sounded like language. His voice was thunder. His eyes were filled with a righteous anger. The dogs whimpered and cowered, intimidated by the immense dogman's presence. They knew that they had messed with the wrong cryptid on that day. Finally, CHET returned to young Grandpa Tate, his head held high. He had saved his friend from certain death, and he was proud of what he had accomplished. Tate looked up at him with awe, realizing just how powerful and noble that Dogman was. From that day on, Chet became a living legend in those woods. The wild dogs never returned, for they knew that Chet was watching over that forest, and whenever other creatures were hurt or in danger, Chet was always there to help. His strength and courage would never be forgotten, and those who witnessed his heroism knew that they were in the presence of greatness. After that, Grandfather Tate and Chet were even closer than before. They became inseparable, and they were always seen together. They would go on hunting trips and explore the countryside, and Chet would protect Grandfather Tate from harm. But let me tell you, folks, Chet's greatest act of heroism was one that no one ever saw coming. It was a beautiful summer day, and my Grandfather Tate and Chet were out in the woods for a leisurely walk. They had been hiking for about an hour when Chet suddenly took off running. Grandfather Tate called for him, but Chet ignored him and ran deep into the woods. Now Grandfather Tate was worried sick. He knew that Chet wouldn't just run off like that without a good reason. So he followed him deep into the woods, hoping to find him. Tate trailed Chet through the forest for about 20 minutes before he finally found him. He was at the edge of a lake, barking at a school bus that was half submerged in the water. Grandfather Tate couldn't believe his eyes. There were children inside that bus, and the water was quickly rising. Without a second thought, Chet dove into the water and started pulling the children out of the bus. Grandfather Tate rushed to help him, and together, they saved every single child. It turns out that the school bus had lost control on a winding road and tumbled down into the lake. Chet, with his incredible sense of hearing, had heard the children's cries for help and ran to their rescue. It was a true act of heroism. From that day on, Chet was not just a hero to my Grandfather Tate, but to the entire village. His legend lived on, and people would tell stories about his bravery for generations to come. And now here I am, telling you all about Chet, a dogman, a hero, and a true friend. He may have left this world many years ago, but his memory will always be alive in our hearts. I remember the story of Chet the dogman having a battle with a big grizzly bear. Grandpa Tate was out on a camping trip deep in the heart of the mountains when he stumbled upon the massive beast. At first, he didn't think he'd make it out alive. The grizzly was huge, towering over him, with its teeth bared and claws extended. But Chet was fearless. He didn't back down in the face of danger. Instead, he stepped forward, barking and growling at the massive bear. The grizzly charged, but Chet didn't flinch. He met the bear head-on, snarling and snapping his powerful jaws. The two went at it, a furious battle between cryptid and beast. It seemed impossible, but like something out of a movie, Chet took down the grizzly. His skill and bravery saved Grandpa Tate's life that day, and if he hadn't, generations of my family would never have been born. There's another great story about Chet, the massive and silent dogman, saving one of the neighbor kids. It was a warm day, and the kids were running around and getting into mischief. Suddenly, Grandpa Tate heard cries for help coming from the edge of the woods. He got up from his porch and raced toward the sound. As he got closer, he could see that one of the neighbor's kids had somehow crawled up inside of an old dead log, and he couldn't get back out. The kid was crying and screaming for help. So, like Commissioner Gordon using the bat signal, Grandpa Tate called out for Chet. Soon enough, he came bounding out of the forest, his massive size and strength earning looks of respect and awe from all the kids around. With a swift and powerful motion, Chet cracked the log open like it was nothing. The kid came out squealing and wiping bugs and larvae off himself for the rest of the day. Everybody was amazed and extremely grateful for Chet's bravery and strength. From that day on, the neighborhood kids would come and visit with Chet when he came out of the woods. Sometimes they'd sit with him for hours on end. They'd pet his fur and admire his massive size, while he watched over them with a sense of calm and ease. Chet may have been tough and silent, but he was also a gentle giant who had a heart of gold. Now, there was another family that moved in as Grandpa Tate got himself a job all the way over in Milwaukee and moved away from the area for a while. This new family did not like CHET at all, and the matriarch of that clan actually tried to have CHET put down by the authorities. I direct you to her, but she's long gone. I have been in touch with her granddaughter on Facebook, who is also now nearing 80 herself, which underscores how old these stories are. I don't know much about her opinions concerning CHET, as I'm only a casual online acquaintance of hers and we were never friends in real life. If she remembers any of the drama with her mother and CHET, that might make a good counterpoint for my stories praising the beast. Editor's note. I contacted the lady in question, who wishes to remain anonymous, but who gave me this official statement about her mother and CHET. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I do remember the animal that you are talking about. My mother told me she witnessed it with her own eyes on 3 occasions, and even though she only saw it walking or standing, these were still very memorable occasions for her, which she would talk about randomly. I am in possession of her diaries, and I'd like to give you an excerpt from one of the times she wrote about the creature in question in the past tense, about 19 years after it had passed on. And I quote, "The Dogman was intimidating, even from a distance. The families that had been there when we moved in, most of whom I remember as being very friendly and honest, but also drunken and dirty much of the time, were treating the Monster Man as though it were a family pet. They would go right up to it and roughhouse with it, supposedly, although I did not get to personally witness that myself. I remember one day being told by my excited sister that one of the dirt roads through the settlement was packed that afternoon with teenage boys, each taking their turn wrestling with CHET. I begged permission to go watch the fights, which enraged my mother. I didn't show interest in the Beastman again after that, since I loved my mother and I never meant to get her so upset at me. If you judge my grandmother as being harsh, diary, I hope you will remember the place and time we were in. Not everybody lived to be an adult back then, even among the rich, and we were not rich. Leading a strict lifestyle gave you a better chance for survival in that atmosphere, and mine was a family of survivors. I did, however, date one of those drunken and dirty teenage boys secretly for a while behind my mother's back, and that boy claimed he personally wrestled CHET on more than one occasion. He used to boast about it to me. Although I was fascinated by it, I would often make him stop talking about the fights he had, because it would get me upset. I didn't want him to get hurt. The idea of that frightened the younger version of me. But he told me that actually CHET the Dogman would pull his claws in and he would play fair. It was just fun to that big beast. He didn't care if he won or not. He just loved to roughhouse, and he loved getting attention from all those boys too. The way he talked about him. CHET was just a big, excitable, fun-loving canine pet. But this pet stood up taller than any man who ever lived. And the idea of even touching him made me feel faint. Dan did admit that he once caught fleas off of the monster. So it turns out to be very true, diary, that if you lie down with dogs, you honestly do wake up with fleas. And that seems like as good a place as any to leave it. That is the story of a time when people were too busy not to believe in the Dogman, especially if that Dogman was named CHET. Hey, it's your old pal Bigfoot with a hot new offer for you for summer. Snag these badass new Scary Stories NYC sandal slide things modeled here by your old pal Bigfoot, and take 25% of the price off by using the checkout code YTShopping25. It's a sweet deal for both of us because YouTube is covering that 25% discount. The link should be in the description, and if you're on YouTube and it's May or June of 2023, then you might see an image of it right under this video. It comes in 5 different colors, so use them to express yourselves. And now here's another Dogman story. We've got one more short little Dogman story for you here, and it's called I Got Mistaken for a Real Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I am an American who has only just gotten back from the UK, where I was unexpectedly cast as a dogman in a horror film being shot mostly in and around Birmingham in England. The original performer quit at the last minute, and I was the only other person around who was the correct size for the costume to fit, so I wasn't cast for my acting talent, of which I have precious little, believe me. The Dogman suit looked pretty decent, I thought, at least from most angles, but we had a problem getting the head on, and then a bigger problem taking it off. It took 2 guys to pull the thing off of me, and the 3 of us needed to rest after the ordeal too. It was actually pretty scary being inside that costume a lot of the time, and I couldn't have done it if I had been claustrophobic. So there was this one shot where we were going to shoot on the same block our offices were located on. They put the costume on me in the office, which took a half hour or longer, depending on whether the outfit wanted to work that day or not. And then the director and cameraman took off in the helicopter they had rented. An assistant director was communicating with the chopper overhead, and he gave me my cue when to walk outside. The job was that I was supposed to walk down this street behind our offices, trying to look scary, and then when I reached the end of the block, turn around and walk back to the office looking equally as scary. This would give them some different overhead shots of the Dogman invading Birmingham for the spooky movie, right? But what actually happened that night was that I started walking down this street, and then some drunk guys who were out partying saw me and started shouting that, hey, there's a monster in that alley. People started looking out their windows and screaming at me, throwing things down at me. I tried to remove my mask, but of course it was stuck on my head. I was trapped in my costume, surrounded by a mob of people who were convinced that I was a real monster. I turned to run back to the office, but there were angry people down there coming my way. That's when I knew I had to get out of there fast. So I started to run, dodging the objects that were being hurled at me. My heart was pounding in my chest as I was looking for a way to escape. I made my way to the main street as soon as I could, thinking I'd be safe there. I was not. Even more people saw me, and it's a credit to the effects crew that these people were thinking that I was an actual dogman or wolfman. As I ran panicked down the street, I spotted a police station up ahead. I knew I had to get inside to escape the mob outside. I sprinted toward the building, my legs moving as fast as they could. I was doing a broken field run around people trying to tackle me, playing American football in England. But then I reached the front steps of the precinct headquarters and made it inside the police station. I was panting heavily as I explained what happened to the officers. They were looking at me and each other, chuckling, and then I realized they couldn't understand a word I was saying with that mask on. At least the cops were sober enough to realize I was a guy in a costume. They started talking about me like I couldn't hear them, speculating on whether this was something I did for sexual reasons or not. It was pretty humiliating, but it was still better than the mob outside. Eventually the film crew caught up with me and they pulled my head off right in the police station, which got a huge laugh and cheer from the officers on duty. You know, you haven't been made fun of until you've been made fun of by the Birmingham Police Department. So I couldn't make it to Daly's, but I've heard the helicopter footage is awesome. A crowd chasing a werewolf through the streets at night. They rewrote the script to make the footage work, because it had cost too much not to use it. Plus, you can tell even from up there how scared that old werewolf was. That didn't require acting talent, believe me. So, the title of the picture keeps changing, but I believe it's going direct to streaming in most countries. They said they were going to tell me when it comes out in America, but they said they were going to pay me before I left England, too. I'll keep my eyes peeled for it, and if and when it comes out stateside, I'll let you all know. That story is the closest thing to a cryptid encounter that ever happened to me, and I was the cryptid in the story. For 32 months, he's a top-tier member from January through December. More exciting than the thriller in Manila, please thank Tim Walker, aka Godzilla. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer, Godzilla Tim Walker, for making this episode possible. Tim is one of our most supportive channel members. He was even writing me last night or this morning from Ireland, giving me advice on YouTube issues I'm trying to work out. He's a guy with some insight about life, and he's a caring soul. But watch out, cause he's also Godzilla. Mr. Walker gets all our perks, but he deserves more than that. Here to explain what those perks are is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.